Everyone in the pack knew her name. Nobody bothered to remember it. Seraphina Cole walked through the great hall of Ashwood Keep every single morning, and every single morning, people looked through her as if she were made of glass. She carried a tray of healing supplies, small brown bottles, folded cloth, a tin of root paste, and she kept her eyes low and her steps quiet. She had learned, very early in her life, that quiet was the safest thing an Omega could be. In the world she lived in, rank was everything. The pack was structured like a mountain, the strongest wolves stood at the top, and everyone else arranged themselves below. Alphas commanded. Betas served them. Deltas filled the middle. And Omegas, the lowest rank, the ones born with the weakest wolf nature, were tolerated at best. Seraphina had been ranked Omega at 18, during the Rite of Emergence, the ceremony where every young wolf's power was meant to appear for the first time. When it was Seraphina's turn, nothing happened. No glow. No shift. No presence in the air. Just a girl standing in the center of a circle, and then a long, awkward silence, and then someone in the crowd coughing to fill the quiet. That had been 4 years ago. She was 22 now, and she had built a life inside those narrow walls the pack gave her. She worked in the healing room under Elder Marin, an old woman with white hair and steady hands who never once treated Seraphina as less than a person. That meant more than Seraphina could say. She spent her days grinding medicines, changing bandages, reading old books about herbs and roots and remedies, and trying, always trying, to be useful enough that no one would question her right to stay. She had one friend. His name was Callum Reed, a beta soldier with a broad smile and an annoying habit of saying exactly what he thought out loud. He had once told a senior warrior to stop being a coward about a small cut, while Seraphina was treating the man's arm, and the warrior had nearly thrown him out a window. Callum had laughed. Seraphina had quietly cleaned up and pretended not to know him for 3 days after. But she always came back. He was the only person who made her feel like herself. The day everything began to shift started like any other. Seraphina was crossing the great hall when she heard the sound of laughter from the far end of the room. Not warm laughter, the kind that belongs to people who are relaxed and comfortable, but the sharp, careless kind. The kind that cuts without meaning to. Alpha King Draven Ashwood stood with a group of his senior betas near the long oak table, a map of the territory spread in front of them. He was tall, dark-haired, with the quiet authority of someone who had never once had to raise his voice to be obeyed. One of his advisors had said something that made the group laugh, and Draven had joined in without really looking up. Then his eyes drifted across the room, the casual survey of a man who owned the space, and landed on Seraphina. He looked at her tray. Then at her. Then he said, in the easy tone of someone making small talk. An Omega in the healing room. The pack really does take care of everyone. The men around him smiled. One of them chuckled. Draven had already looked back at the map. Seraphina kept walking. She did not pause. She did not look at him. She carried her tray through the hall and down the corridor and into the healing room and set it on the wooden counter and stood there for a moment with her back to the door. Then she took a breath. Then she picked up the first bottle and got to work. She had learned not to let it stay inside her. Feelings, she had decided, were like water, they needed somewhere to go, or they would flood everything. She let herself feel the sting for exactly 1 minute, and then she put it away. She had patience to look after. 3 weeks later, the sickness came. It moved through the pack quietly at first, a fever here, a strange weakness there. The senior healers treated it as a passing illness, something that would run its course. But it did not run its course. It deepened. And the strangest thing about it was who it chose. The sickness did not touch the weaker wolves. It went straight for the strongest. The alphas and the high-ranking betas began to fall ill one by one, their bodies burning with a fever that no herb could break, their strength draining as if something were pulling it out of them slowly. Within a week, Draven himself was confined to his chamber. The pack went very still when the news spread. An Alpha King weakened was not something any of them had seen before. The Council of Fangs, the 7 elders who advised the king, met every day in hushed, urgent sessions. The senior healers tried everything they knew. Nothing worked. The sickness had no name anyone living could remember. Seraphina found the name on her 5th night of searching. She had started going to the old records room after her shift ended, a dusty, rarely visited archive at the back of the keep that held books so old the pages had gone brown at the edges. She was not entirely sure what she was looking for. She only knew that something in her kept pulling her there, some quiet certainty that the answer existed somewhere in writing if she looked long enough. On the fifth night, she found it. A record from 300 years ago described an illness called the Shadow Sickness, a supernatural fever that targeted dominant wolves specifically, designed to drain power from the strongest members of a pack. The record described it in careful, frightened handwriting. And at the bottom of the page, in smaller writing that looked almost like an afterthought, it said, "The only known remedy is lumen-touched healing." A practitioner of the old bloodline. Seraphina read that line 4 times. Then she closed the book carefully and sat in the quiet archive for a long time, very still. She brought the book to Elder Marin the next morning. Marin read the page without speaking. Then she set the book on her table and folded her hands and looked at Seraphina with an expression that Seraphina had never seen on the old woman's face before. It was not surprise. It was something closer to relief, the expression of someone who has been carrying a secret for a very long time and has finally been given permission to set it down. "I need to tell you something," Marin said. "I should have told you years ago. I was trying to protect you." And then she told her everything. Seraphina's mother had come from an ancient line called the Lumen Wolves, a bloodline that existed before the current pack system, before ranks and hierarchies and rites of emergence. The Lumen Wolves carried a different kind of power, one that did not announce itself with dominance or force. It was a power of deep knowing, of healing that went beyond ordinary medicine, of a silver light that could touch what nothing else could reach. The bloodline had been declared extinct for generations. But it was not extinct. It had simply been hidden. Seraphina's mother had bound the bloodline before Seraphina was born, wrapped it in a quiet suppression that kept it invisible, kept it from announcing itself at the rite of emergence, kept Seraphina ranked as Omega so that no one would look at her too closely. She had done it out of love. She had done it because she was afraid of what the pack might do to a girl with that kind of power, in a world that did not understand it. "But the binding has been weakening," Marin said softly. "It was never meant to last a lifetime. Your bloodline has been pushing through for years now. You must have felt it." Seraphina thought about the silver flash she had seen in her own eyes, reflected in the still forest pool at night. She had told herself it was the light. She had told herself that every single time. "Yes," she said. "I felt it." She sat with the information for a moment. She thought about her mother, who had been afraid. She thought about 4 years of walking through the great hall with her eyes low. She thought about the casual, careless laugh that had floated across a room full of people and landed on her like something small being brushed off a table. Then she stood up. "Tell me how to use it," she said. Callum walked with her to the Alpha King's chamber. He did not ask many questions. He had looked at her face when she came to find him, and he had said, "You figured something out, didn't you?" She had nodded. He had put on his jacket and said, "Then let's go." That was why she kept him. The guards at Draven's door were not pleased to see an Omega healer's assistant requesting entry. One of them almost sent her away on the spot. But Luna Isolde, the king's senior advisor and childhood companion, had been passing the corridor at that moment, and she had seen the book under Seraphina's arm, and she had read enough of the old records herself to recognize it. "Let her in," Isolde said quietly. And the guard stepped aside. The room was dim. The heavy curtains were pulled against the afternoon light, and the air inside was warm and still. Draven sat up against the headboard of a large bed, his dark hair pushed back, his eyes open but tired. He looked like a man fighting something from the inside, holding himself together by sheer habit when his body wanted to rest. He looked at Seraphina when she came in, and for a moment his expression shifted, something between confusion and pride that did not quite know which one to be. "The Omega healer," he said. His voice was quieter than she had heard it before. She did not correct him. She simply pulled a chair to the side of his bed, set her things down, and said, "I need you to stay still and let me work. Can you do that?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. She placed her hands on his arm the way she had been taught, steady, present, without hesitation. She had done this hundreds of times with ordinary healing. She knew the feel of a body fighting illness, the way fever sits in the skin like trapped fire. But this time, she did something she had never allowed herself to do before. She stopped holding herself back. It was not a decision that came with thunder or drama. It was quieter than that. It was the moment when a person who has been holding their breath for a very long time finally, simply, exhales. She stopped making herself small. She stopped hiding the part of herself that knew things it had no explanation for, that felt things deeper than touch, that had been pressing against the inside of her chest for years like a light behind a curtain. The curtain dropped. The room filled with silver light. It came from her hands first, then spread outward, a soft, steady glow that moved through the air the way heat moves, without sound, without rush. It was not blinding. It was the opposite of blinding. It made everything clearer, sharper, more real, as if the room had been slightly out of focus before and had only now come right. Serafina felt the shadow sickness in his body the way you feel a knot in a rope. She found it, understood it, and then simply undid it. There was no struggle. The illness had no defense against what she carried, because what she carried was older than the illness, older than the pack's rules, older than any of the systems that had decided she was the lowest thing in the room. In the corridor outside, Callum stood straight and stared at the silver light coming through the gap under the door. Down the hall, the other sick members of the pack, the alphas, the betas, the warriors who had laughed at things they did not understand, began to feel the fever lift from their bodies as if a cool hand had simply removed it. The whole keep exhaled. When it was over, Serafina lifted her hands and sat back. The silver light faded slowly, the way a candle fades after you blow it out, lingering warmly for a moment before it was gone. She felt tired, but not empty. She felt, in fact, more like herself than she ever had. Draven's eyes were fully open. The fever was gone. The exhausted tightness around his face had lifted. He looked at his own hands for a moment, as if checking that he was real. Then he looked at her. She met his eyes without looking away. She did not lower her gaze. She did not make herself smaller. "What are you?" he asked. His voice was low, without the easy authority she was used to hearing in it. She considered the question. Then she answered it honestly. "I am what I have always been," she said. "You simply never looked." The Council of Fangs met 2 days later. Discovery of a living Lumen wolf bloodline was, according to laws older than anyone in the room, a matter of formal record. The elders sat in their carved chairs and reviewed the evidence, the record Serafina had found, Elder Marin's testimony, the account of every person who had been in the keep when the silver light moved through it. There was no real debate. The law was clear. The Lumen bloodline stood outside the rank system, not above it, not below it, but alongside it in a way that the current hierarchy had no category for. Draven stood before the council and spoke. He did not have to. No one required it of him. But he stood and he told the truth, not in the smooth, political language of a king addressing his council, but in plain, flat words that clearly cost him something to say. He said that he had dismissed her. That he had laughed, not cruelly, which might have at least shown that he thought she mattered enough to dislike, but carelessly, the way you dismiss something you have never bothered to consider. He said that he had been wrong. He said that wrong done in public deserved to be corrected in public. The hall was very quiet when he finished. Serafina, seated at the far end of the council table, because she had been invited to sit, for the first time in her life, at the table, listened to every word. When he was done, she did not make a speech. She did not tell him it was fine, because it had not always been fine. She did not tell him she forgave him, because forgiveness is something that grows in its own time and cannot be rushed by a public moment. She simply nodded. Slowly. Once. That was enough. That evening, she walked to the edge of the forest alone. The moon was full and bright, and the trees were dark and still, and the air smelled like pine and cold earth, the same as it always had, the same as it smelled the 100 times she had come here to be alone with herself. She found the still pool. Her reflection looked back at her from the surface of the water. Her eyes were silver. Not for just a moment. Not a flash that she could tell herself was the light. Steadily, clearly, warmly silver, the color of her mother's bloodline, the color of something ancient and certain and entirely, completely hers. She did not blink it away. She looked at it. For the first time in her life, she looked at herself without flinching. Behind her, she heard a quiet step on the grass. She knew without turning that it was Callum. He came to stand beside her, hands in his pockets, looking at the pool. "Nice eyes," he said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and warm and slightly surprised, the kind that comes when something genuinely catches you off guard. She had not laughed like that in a very long time. "Thank you," she said. They stood there together for a while, the two of them, looking at the moon on the water. The pack was behind them, in the keep, going about its evening. The world had not become simple overnight. There were still old systems and old habits and long years of a particular story being told about who she was. Those things do not disappear in a day. But they had started to. And Seraphina Cole, Omega Healer's assistant, quiet walker of corridors, keeper of her own secret for 22 years, stood in the moonlight with silver eyes and her shoulders relaxed for the first time, and she understood something that no rank and no ceremony and no Alpha King's opinion had ever been able to give her and no one had ever been able to take. She had always been enough. She had always been more than enough. The world was only just catching up.